This video is geared more towards the people who are debating whether or not to get a tank. If so, how big, where they should place it. So placing your tank in the right place is very important. One, you want to find an area in your house where you're not going to have direct sunlight. By having direct sunlight hitting your tank, you're going to have algae blooms and you're going to constantly be battling them and cleaning your tank, which could easily be avoided if you place the tank in an area where you do not have direct sunlight. Next piece is you want to measure it and you want to see how big of a tank you can select. Selecting the right size is also very important because typically when a person goes with a first tank, hey, they'll go with something smaller because they think it's easier. It actually is not. It's a lot easier to go with a bigger tank because it's a lot more forgiving. And in terms of that, I could get into that in later videos, or some of my earlier videos will help you understand why going with a bigger tank is better. In terms of cost, it's not a much bigger cost to go with a bigger tank versus going with a smaller tank if you take into consideration livestock and how much of the equipment you're going to get. For example, a skimmer for a tank that's like 60 gallons is going to run you about $200 to $300 depending on how high end you're going to go. Going with a protein skimmer for a tank that's about 100 gallons is typically going to cost you about $50 to $100 more, which once again, in the grand scheme of things, it's really not that much of a difference. The cost of the tank, however, is going to be probably double if you're going to go with a double-sized tank. But again, if it's going to cost you a lot more money if you're going to go with a smaller tank and then upgrade, because if you're going to go with a smaller tank, you're going to get smaller equipment, and when you go to a bigger tank, you're going to need to buy new equipment all over again. So you definitely want to plan for the future. Another thing is, once you pick out an area for your tank, next part is you want to find an area for a quarantine tank. If you don't have space for a quarantine tank, going with a saltwater aquarium is not the right solution for you. Reason being is most of these fish, they come from the sea and they could carry parasites and all sorts of diseases. If you don't properly quarantine your fish, what's going to happen is you will sooner or later, most likely sooner than later, introduce ick or marine velvet or some other kind of disease in your tank, which is going to completely wipe out all of your livestock. Which is why an area for a small QT tank, like 10 to 20 gallons, is ideal. Also keep in mind, the quarantine tank is not going to be running all the time. You're only going to keep it going for about 6 to 8 months until you fully stock your tank. The reason why I say 6 to 8 months is because into a quarantine tank, depending on the size, how big of a quarantine tank you have, you're typically not going to introduce more than 3 to 4 fish at a time. My quarantine process, depending on the type of fish I get, is anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks if everything goes well. So fish like tangs, they're going to be going for the full 6 weeks because they're going to go through a ProZipro treatment and a copper treatment. Next part is you want to measure the size of the door. And I say this because you may want to go a little bigger than average and the tank may not fit through the door. And if you're going to go with a tank that big, you also want to take into account weight restrictions. A typical tank that's about up to 120 gallons, you don't need to worry about. Anything above 120 gallons, you definitely want to see to make sure that your floor can support this kind of weight. Be mindful of the shape of the tank. There are a lot of really cool tanks out there that are round in shape, tall, long, pick a shape, they have it. One thing to take into consideration, you will have to perform maintenance on this tank. You will aquascape this tank. My favorite tanks are a rectangle and something that is not more than 30 inches high. Reason being is you're going to need to reach to the bottom of the tank. You need to pick stuff up, move stuff around. These odd-shaped tanks make it difficult to aquascape, difficult to reach the bottom, and make it very difficult for maintenance. Difficult for maintenance means you're not going to maintain your tank. Bad husbandry equals to dead livestock. After you figure all that stuff out, you also want to make a decision whether you're going to go with a reef tank or a fish only tank. The thing with that is, even if you decide to go with a fish only tank, I still strongly recommend you plan to have corals later on. In terms of an investment for corals versus a fish only tank, the only thing you really have to consider is the lights. Everything else could be added later. So when you buy a tank, make sure you buy good quality lights. That way, if you decide to upgrade and add corals at a later point in time, you're not shelling out for anything else. Now, once you finally picked out a place, it's also very important that you have easy access to an outlet, because when it comes to outlets and fish tanks, you're going to need a lot. Um, Typically, I would say 8 to 10 outlets is the minimum, or I should say it's a good standard. So you want to have an outlet somewhere nearby. And lastly is water management. So wherever it is you place your tank, keep in mind you're going to have to do water changes. So you want to be in an area where water is easily accessible for you to drain, as well as to make. Now, in a lot of applications, you may not necessarily be able to create your own water, but there are a lot of compact RODI units out there where you would be able to temporarily set them up, so that way you could at least make auto top off water for yourself. Even if you're going to buy salt water from your local fish store, when it comes to auto top off, I strongly recommend that you make your own water because it evaporates quick. For example, this is a reefer 450, so I have 92 gallons of water in the tank, and I have a 24-gallon sump. I add anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 gallons of water every single day, depending on how hot it is and other various factors. So just keep that in mind. If you have any questions, please comment. I'll be more than happy to answer them. If you like the content that I provide, please subscribe.